Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're going to be talking about the best decks to play for ranked mode for this new ranked season that just started today for Pokemon Pocket. This is going to be the Eevee Grove A3B ranked season, so I think this is like the fourth season that we've had so far, but all of the new cards just came out, a bunch of new decks, new strategies. It's tough to know what decks you should be playing, which decks are the best. Of course, it is still really early in this metagame. However, I will be letting you guys know what I believe the best deck choices are for this sort of early week or first few days of the ranked season. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Win streaks were also added to Ultra Ball and Master Ball tier, so big changes in the ranked season this season. But one thing I will say is that the metagame has also changed a lot for sure. So we're going to go ahead. I have 8 different decks today. These are going to be my top 8 picks. Now, one thing I will say is that definitely things are subject to change. It's still early on. We don't have a ton of data to really justify or know which decks really are the best, but this is definitely going to be my opinion based off of, you know, all the research I've done and all of the personal testing I've done. And the other thing I will say is that if any decks are not listed here in this particular video, stay tuned because we're going to be covering all of the decks that I am not talking about in today's video in tomorrow's video. So keep that in mind. Stay tuned. Anyway, let's hop right into it. The first deck that we're going to be talking about is going to be Incineroar EX. So honestly, you know, these aren't in any order in any, sense. I just wanted to talk about Incineroar first of all, because with the new house supporter, all of these Alola, starter trio Pokemon are absolutely crazy. Incineroar saw a lot of play before HOW was released, so I think a lot of people had their eyes on Incineroar to see if it would be any better, and I do think Incineroar is incredibly strong. The ability here to do 30 damage with Fire Fang and Burn was always really strong. For 1 energy, these rare candy Pokemon, these stage 2 Pokemon with 1 energy and their attack cost are in general very strong. Incineroar definitely was one of those. However, that 30 damage now can go up to 60 with HOW, plus the Burn. We can take KOs on a lot of basic Pokemon early in the game, but also the Scar Charged Smash attack for 3 energies is also getting boosted by HOW, so we can take 1-hit KOs on a lot of different Pokemon in the game right now. So I do think Incineroar is a really, really strong choice. Now, it is kind of up in the air still what the best way to play Incineroar is. This is an early example of a deck that did well at a tournament in the first day of competition here in Eevee Grove, and I do like it. So it really is just kind of a basic Incineroar deck, 2 Litten, 1 Torcat, 2 Incineroar, and we are playing one of the new collect EVs that draw cards, and then one of these assist heater Flareon cards. This is one of the new non-EX Flareon cards. This card is really cool. It does some early chip damage for 2 energies, but it accelerates energies to your bench Pokemon, allows us to potentially get Incineroar powered up, while of course it might take a little while to find rare candy and evolve into it. Just sort of an additional kind of lead-off option. And I think that in general, any of these sort of rare candy decks that are really strong in the early game are going to have a lot of high roll potential, just because, of course, you could find that rare candy early on. It's like Charizard, it's like Solgaleo. A lot of these Pokemon can just do a lot of damage really early on, and you can find that rare candy early. I think that Incineroar is very volatile now. It's very potent with the new HOW supporter. Of course, we still have Lily to provide that extra healing, and we are playing Rocky Helmet as well. So again, a little bit more of an aggressive option here with Incineroar. If we do end up getting 2 Incineroars on the board and forcing your opponent to go through 2 of them, that's going to be pretty dangerous. I think Incineroar has been buffed pretty heavily by HOW. And not only that, but again, these rare candy decks that are typically what I call like high roll decks, they're a bit more focused on getting lucky, are actually probably going to be better in my mind for this ranked season. Not only because, luck does play a factor no matter what in Pokemon Pocket, but now we have win streaks, like I was saying before, both in Ultra Ball and Master Ball tier. So what this means is that you kind of want to play decks that have the potential to be really strong if they do get lucky, because of course win streaks are also a little bit based on luck. So when you're playing these high roll decks, you have always the opportunity to get lucky a couple games in a row, get on a nice win streak, and then get some extra points, right? So things like Incineroar always have the potential to kind of beat whatever you're facing, just because it can be so strong and so overwhelming in the early game if we get a little bit lucky. But yeah, Incineroar is a really interesting one. I want to keep my eyes on Incineroar. We have a lot of different fire type Pokemon that are strong in the format. There is going to be one other fire deck that we'll take a look at, but of course we still have the Charizard Sylveon deck. We've got Incineroar, we've got the new Flareon. There's so many different ways that we can play fire type decks right now. I do think that Incineroar might have a little bit of a bias early on, just because of the new HOW supporter, which of course is going to boost the damage by 30. 30 whenever we attack. Incredible supporter, by the way, just absolutely insane. You know, Incineroar in general is a pretty good Pokemon. You could play it with Turtonator, you could play it with Silvally, you could play it with Flareon EX. There's a lot of different ways that we can play Incineroar. This was just the example that I wanted to showcase. So feel free to test out, you know, however different, you know, versions of Incineroar you want. I think that Incineroar will definitely end up in the metagame to some degree as time goes on, but right now this seems to be the Incineroar list that most people are having success with early on, and I do like it. Some things you could change around for sure. You could swap out Rocky Helmet for maybe some additional supporter cards. I think How here is pretty needed, and like I said, the Assist Heater Flareon is more of like a tech inclusion, just sort of an alternate leadoff option. You can even maybe kind of thin some other cards out of your deck to play like a Pokemon Communications, or maybe play Iono as well, which is typically pretty good in these sort of, you know, decks that are playing a lot of different Pokemon and a lot of different, you know, puzzle pieces that need to be kind of put together properly. So yeah, here's Incineroar. Again, it's just been improved by how Incineroar was always a pretty good card, and I think that it's honestly even better now than it was before. So there is Incineroar. By the way, don't forget to comment down below and let me know what you guys think of all of the decks that we're mentioning in this video. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. Like I said, there's probably going to be some decks that you're curious about that are not in today's video, but trust me, they'll probably be in tomorrow's video. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Okay, next up, we've got something that isn't necessarily a new deck list, but I think is still really well positioned in this particular format, and that is going to be Magnezone and Oricorio. So honestly, Magnezone is really good in a variety of different scenarios. I think in this format, it really is no different. Silvally still is probably going to be pretty common. A lot of those smaller evolution cards that might see play like Umbreon or Jolteon or, you know, Sylveon, things like that, Magnezone does really well with. So Magnezone really is kind of the anti, you know, non-EX Pokemon, if that makes any sense. It's just really strong against all of these Pokemon that aren't EX Pokemon that see a lot of play. So Magnezone very well positioned, and in general, Oricorio is probably one of the best Pokemon to be playing right now early on in the metagame. I think a lot of people just end up forgetting about Oricorio to some degree, mostly because nobody really wants to play Oricorio or really deal with it because they're busy playing all of the new cards. So this being probably the best way that we can play an Oricorio deck, at least for now, it's gonna end up being a really strong option. This was one of the top decks of last format. It's performed extremely well early on in a couple of these large tournaments in the first few days. So again, no surprise to me. This was a really strong deck at the end of last format. I don't think anything has really entered into the format that would really change my mind here. The only thing that Magnezone and Oricorio really struggled with previously was Silvally Rampardos, which again dipped in play towards the end of the last ranked season, and I don't think a ton of people are playing Silvally Rampardos right now. That could change because it is, of course, still a really strong deck, but as long as fighting decks aren't very common, which to be fair, they really aren't, I think that Magnezone and Oricorio is still a top choice. Now, we're playing the Shiinotic line, of course, we're playing the Magnezone line, and then one copy of Oricorio. Like I said, everything here is pretty standard as it was last format. I have seen some people swap out the Shiinotic Morlo line for a Sylveon line, which draws 2 cards. Now, I don't actually think that that's the better option, if I'm being entirely honest with you. Theoretically speaking, if we were playing Sylveon, you could play dual energies. You could play Psychic and Electric energies, mainly because Magnezone, you know, you don't have to play exclusively Lightning energies if you're playing Magnezone, and it's the same for Oricorio. So you could swap out Shiinotic for Sylveon, play Electric type and Psychic type energies, and at least have an additional attacking option. You will theoretically move through your deck a bit quicker. However, Shiinotic, I believe finding Pokemon specifically is probably a bit better for Magnezone. And not only that, it is, of course, not an EX Pokemon, so your opponent, no matter what in this deck list, has to go through 3 Pokemon to win. Magnezone with 140 HP with Giant Cape, with the extra healing with Pokemon Center Lady, it's kind of a tall task to go through multiple Magnezones. And then, of course, for the decks that are weak to Oricorio, we have an Oricorio, just to kind of make things even more difficult for your opponent. So I still think Magnezone is very well positioned. Maybe in the future we do see that Sylveon variant that is playing Lightning and Psychic energies. We'll have to see. I thought about mentioning it in today's video, but maybe kind of keeping it for tomorrow's video. I personally still think Shiinotic might be the better option for Magnezone, but again, we cannot sleep on Magnezone. There's going to be a handful of decks that are from, you know, our older decks from previous formats in this video. I think we have like 4 new decks and then 4 kind of older decks that I think are all really strong right now. But keep in mind, the best decks of the previous format are likely still going to be good in this new format, maybe with a few exceptions. So keep that in mind. Yeah, even if you don't have all of the new cards from Eevee Grove, you can still play very, very strong decks that are well positioned and hopefully win you a ton of games. I think that Magnezone and Oricorio, or any kind of form of Oricorio, will remain relevant throughout this entire format, mainly because it has to. I think that even with Silvally being really common last format, Oricorio ended up being one of the better options and the better choices, and I think it'll just kind of remain the same in this particular format. It's just a card that, you know, kind of defines the metagame to some degree. So anyway, guys, there is Magnezone and Oricorio. Nothing different, nothing, you know, has changed really. Like I said, you could swap out Shiinotic for Sylveon. However, I think that this is still a really, really strong deck, so we have to consider it, and I had to include it in today's video. Next up is going to be our other fire type choice, a new fire type deck being Flareon EX. Flareon EX is very interesting. I think that a lot of people were assuming Flareon would be really strong, and that's because it is really strong. However, there's a ton of other fire type decks in the format. So from a pure, you know, metagame data perspective, from like a statistical standpoint, I don't know if Flareon will really take off and dominate the metagame. Because there's so many other fire type deck choices, right? So if you're choosing to play fire, you have the new Flareon, you have Incineroar, which just got buffed, you have all of the Charizard decks previously. So there's a lot of you know, real estate that's been kind of split up between different decks from the fire type archetype perspective. However, Flareon being a new fire type card is really, really strong. So similar to Incineroar, there's a lot of ways that we can play Flareon. The choice that I'm choosing to showcase in this video is going to be with Turtonator. And this is not only the best performing early Flareon deck so far, but I think it just makes a lot of sense. Turtonator, Kiawe combo saw a lot of play in previous formats. I think it's still really strong. Again, a bit of a high roll deck. All of these fire decks end up being a bit of high roll decks, but the synergy between Turtonator and Flareon really is phenomenal. You know, Turtonator being able to get set up really quickly with Kiawe means it's actually pretty good going first. And that's fairly rare. Playing a deck that at least is somewhat strong going first is good in the format, because especially in ranked battles, because, you know, it's random. You don't know if you're going to be going first or second. So we would like to play a deck that doesn't mind going first. A lot of the fire decks actually don't, which is interesting to keep in mind. Actually, all 3 or 4 fire decks that are in the format right now actually don't mind going first. So that's kind of a unique trait for fire type decks. But anyway, Turtonator with Kiawe, we can get it spun up, 120 HP. We are living attacks in the early game from basically everything. It's a great counter to Oricorio, and then of course it does discard energies when you attack for 90 damage, meaning that we can put that fire energy back onto Flareon and then get this thing set up. So theoretically speaking, you want your opponent to have to go through like 1 or 2 Turtonators, and then we go into Flareon. We can keep it at high HP because we are playing 2 Eevee bags and 2 Pokemon Center ladies. So the damage that Flareon takes is during your turn, which means that it's really not that bad, because after we use the combustibility, we can then go ahead and then just heal our Flareon up on our turn. So that way when we bring it in, it's at full HP. Turtonator plus Rocky Helmet, and of course the 130 from Flareon plus the Rocky Helmet and the boosted damage from Eevee Bag should allow us to take 1 KOs on a lot of Pokemon in the format. And that's really where I think Flareon shines, is it's very easily set up. And at 130 damage, it's actually a really flexible amount where we're KOing a lot of Pokemon. Again, we can extend a little bit with Eevee Bag and with Rocky Helmet, plus the damage from Turtonator. We really should be able to at least 2-hit KO all of the, you know, highest HP Pokemon in the game, but also 1-hit KO a lot of different Pokemon in the game right now. We're hitting for weakness on a lot of different Pokemon, Buzzwole being one of them. Spoiler, Buzzwole will be mentioned in this video because I still think it's a top deck, even with all the fire running around. But Flareon as a consistent tempo-based fire deck is going to be really good against Buzzwole, which is important, right? Because Buzzwole is probably the best deck of the previous format. It's something that we have to account for going into this new metagame, so we have to, you know, keep that in mind. Flareon definitely going to be a strong counter to Buzzwole. And yeah, I like Flareon and I love Turtonator, so I think that this might be the best way to play Turtonator right now. And to be fair, we could still play Turtonator with things like Incineroar or Charizard, but I think it pairs pretty well with Flareon, and I think that's probably where it's going to find its home. So yeah, this is, to me, is probably the better way to play Flareon EX, at least right now. Of course, if we are going or leading off with Eevee, it doesn't feel that great, but we can always attach and then collect, and then on the following turn, what we can do is just retreat, evolve, and then combust and bring that energy back onto Flareon. So realistically, Eevee and Flareon kind of have free retreat, which is pretty good. You definitely want to retreat before you evolve, so keep that in mind for sure. And then, yeah, 2 copies of Pokemon Center Lady, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars, 1 red card. So a bit of hand disruption, I think, goes well with Turtonator, mainly because sometimes we don't get that combo off early, so we would like to maybe hinder our opponent a bit in the early game, and we don't want to get outpaced, because this is definitely a tempo deck that likes to be on the you know, on the right side of, you know, the draw consistency, right? We don't want to fall too far behind in the early game advantage, so red card in Mars is probably going to help us with that a bit, and I think that's smart. We're probably going to see that pretty heavily in this particular format. I think a lot of the decks that are the most common decks suffer pretty heavily from early hand disruption, kind of similar to last format, if we're being honest with you. So keep your eyes on things like Mars and red card to be in a lot of different decks. I think they're really useful, particularly in this deck. I think it's very, very useful. So anyway, guys, here is Flareon and Turtonator. Don't sleep on it. I do think Flareon is really good, but maybe some of the other fire decks will kind of, you know, emerge as a better option. Again, we'll have to see. see. I think that fire in general is really good right now for a multitude of reasons, mainly because things like grass and metal are pretty common still in this ranked format. So keep that in mind. Anyway, Flareon EX with Turtonator is going to be my recommendation as to how we play Flareon, a really, really strong new fire type deck that's a little bit more consistent and tempo based than things like Incineroar and Charizard, which, you know, are rare candy decks. So it's nice to have that option for sure. Maybe one day we'll get a basic fire type EX attacker. Today's not the day, but maybe we will get something like that in the format at some point. Anyway, there is Flareon. Next up is going to be Solgaleo. So especially in the first couple of tournaments, Solgaleo performed really well. I think the biggest reason why Solgaleo is good in the format right now is it was always a strong counter to Silvally. That was kind of its main placement in the format previously, particularly Silvally and Rampardos. However, it struggles against Oricorio. Again, early on in these metagames, not a lot of people are playing Oricorio, at least not yet. Maybe after this video, after my recommendations, more people will play Oricorio because I think it's probably a really smart choice. But beside the fact, a lot of people are playing the new Sylveon decks, which of course Sylveon is very weak to Solgaleo. Without a giant cape or something, you're getting one it KO'd for weakness. So Solgaleo really, really strong against all of these Sylveon decks, which are seeing a ton of play, but you're also still good against Silvally, which is still also seeing a lot of play early on in the format. So even though there's a lot of fire running around, Solgaleo definitely appears to be one of the most popular decks in this early metagame and probably one of the better choices, which I find to be quite interesting. Solgaleo was actually really good. It was one of like the top 3 or top 4 decks of the previous format, and I don't know if that's really going to change around that much. Of course, if Oricorio becomes very common, Solgaleo dips down. There are some options in terms of cards that we can pair with Solgaleo to maybe counter that. But in general, I think that Solgaleo does quite well against a lot of the most common decks in the format right now because Sylveon is seeing so much play, which will be included in this video. We will be talking about Sylveon later on. Solgaleo hasn't changed much really at all, so that's the upside. Red is going to allow you to take KOs where your opponent's Sylveon might be attaching a giant cape, or there's just a lot of Pokemon that have 140 HP. So Red, I think, is probably better than Guzma right now, but that could be the case. You could swap out Red for Guzma. 1 Lily is probably correct, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, and then 1 giant cape, which I also think is probably pretty smart. Giant Cape's going to be really good in the Charizard matchup or the Incineroar matchup, things like that. Even Flareon to some extent, because Solgaleo does damage itself. Flareon can extend pretty hard, so we got to be careful of that. It's also running, you know, that Rocky Helmet Eevee bag combo, so a little bit scary for sure. Tons of fire decks running around, but in general, I think Solgaleo does well. It also has a great Buzzwole matchup, traditionally, and Buzzwole is still something that's people are playing a lot. So yeah, I really like Solgaleo. Honestly, I think at this point, it's probably as well positioned as it ever has been, which is interesting with how many fire decks are seeing play. But good against Silvally, good against Sylveon, the new Sylveon decks, and it's good against, of course, Buzzwole. And that, to me, is enough reason to be considering Solgaleo. Now, there are some ways that we can kind of change around Solgaleo if we wanted to play a new version of it. Instead of Shiinotic, we could play Sylveon, you could play Dual Energies, or you could just play like Sylveon and then play like an additional metal type attacker to counter Oricorio. I don't think any of that's really worth it. I think kind of the tried and true method here for Solgaleo is probably the better option. I just think that it's still a really strong deck. Another high roll deck. So again, with win streaks in the format, playing these sort of rare candy decks that have the potential to just go crazy, you can always go second and then turn to Solgaleo, and there's really not much that your opponent can do. So that being said, maybe you get lucky, maybe you go on a win streak, and win streaks are really the main kind of defining factor of this new season. You got to understand that whether your win rate is 50% or 55%, there's a lot of variance in terms of how many games we're winning in a row. And I think that is a good thing in Ultra Ball tier. However, I have expressed that I don't believe win streaks are a good thing for Master Ball tier. That's just my opinion. But to get to Master Ball, it's really nice because, again, variance is going to play a factor. Sometimes you're going to win 10 in a row and then lose 10 in a row. And then if that happens, at least we're going net positive on points. So I think it's a good thing for sure. And that's where really these sort of, kind of pop off, explosive, RNG-based decks like Solgaleo and really all of these rare candy decks kind of really come in handy. So yeah, here we go. Dodge those Oricorios, dodge those fire decks. Solgaleo is going to be doing quite well for you, and definitely something that I would recommend for sure. Okay, next up, guys, is the shameless plug. Of course, 68.9% of you guys are still not subscribed. The support has been incredible. We just hit 25,000 subscribers on the channel, which is nuts. But again, a lot of you guys that are watching my videos, especially in the first few days of this new set release, are not subscribed. So if you guys want to go ahead and check to see if you are subscribed, I would really appreciate it. It's literally free. It doesn't cost you anything, and it supports the channel. So if you appreciate the content, if you want to stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. Okay, we had to sneak it in here. We had to. Okay. All right, moving on. The last 4 decks of the video This one might be controversial, but this is going to be Dragonite EX. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Dragonite. In my early testing, this deck is insane. There's a lot of different ways of which we can play Dragonite. In this particular list, we're going to be playing dual energies. Should I go back, actually? Oh, hold on. Let me check. This is playing fire, of course. I got to call out which energies we're playing. This deck is playing pure electric energies. This deck's playing fire, and this deck plays metal. Okay, I just want to get that out there because I haven't mentioned that. A lot of times I think it's obvious, but I want to at least mention it. So this particular deck is playing both water and electric energies, of course, right? Because we're playing Pokemon that have both water and electric energies in their attack cost. But the thing with Zeraora is that it's very underrated. Even last format, I thought Zeraora was one of the better Pokemon in the game. It just didn't see that much play. Things like Zeraora and Oricorio can be kind of put really easily into these electric type decks, and we can just play Dragonite. So effectively speaking, we're playing, an aggressive deck with Zeraora, which can generate additional energies. Zeraora is one of the best Pokemon to use with Electrical Cord because it's 2 energies to attack, but it generates 1 energy basically freely if we get it in the early game. And of course, even if we want to just pivot out, it gives us free retreat because we generate that free energy if we are leading off with Zeraora. So I know some people just don't feel great about Zeraora because it isn't very useful late in the game. But again, you could say that about so many different Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket. Like if you're not drawing your Pokemon when you need them, they're not useful. That's just how the game goes. So playing a Pokemon that is effectively free retreat or really early damage, we can do 50 damage on our second turn going first or on our second turn going second. That's the upside to Zeraora. Effectively free retreat because we get that free energy. And I think, of course, the 2 energies attached to Zeraora to attack, we can then use it to be our kind of leadoff Pokemon, or Oricorio, 2 energies to attack. Then we can use Electrical Cord and move those 2 energies to our bench Pokemon and then set up Dragonite more easily. So I really like this particular deck. Now, the only inconsistency here is that Zeraora needs 2 lightning energies to attack. So unfortunately, if the first energy we get in our zone is water, we're kind of forced to attach that either to Oricorio or our Dratini/Dragonite. So that's really what this deck is all about. At the end of the day, it's 2 Oricorio, and I think early on Oricorio in this metagame is absolutely broken, but Dragonite is massively, massively underrated. I think pairing a Pokemon that can basically 1-hit KO anything in the game with Oricorio, which is immune to half the Pokemon in the game, actually creates an incredible strategy that cannot be underrated. So although Dragonite hasn't seen a ton of play in tournaments so far, and we don't have a ton of data, I'm actually very confident that Dragonite's one of the better decks in this early meta. That might change as time goes on. Dual energy decks can be a little bit annoying, but like I said, we're guaranteed to get those lightning energies with Zeraora. We are playing 2 copies of Dawn as well for extra flexibility. Electrical Cord, we're even playing Irida because we're playing electric and water energies to heal up our Oricorio and our Dragonite. This deck has so many different win conditions, it really is kind of difficult to explain how effective this particular strategy is. In my mind, one of the most underrated Pokemon early on in this metagame. I would massively, massively recommend that you consider playing Dragonite. The high HP, the high damage, like I said, it is just something that can win no matter what. And again, also a bit of a high roll deck, but whenever you're playing these sort of high roll rare candy decks with things like Oricorio and Zeraora, you're actually a lot more consistent in the early game than you might think. Now, we are playing 1 X speed because in some matchups, leading Oricorio is really bad. It just feels terrible. You could even swap 1 Oricorio for 1 Dragonair. I had a deck list originally very similar to that where I was only playing 1 Oricorio, and just mainly because against so many matchups in the format, Oricorio isn't useful, so you really don't want to lead with it because it is kind of effectively, kind of a waste, right? But at the end of the day, Oricorio is going to win you so many games, and it's just something that I can't recommend enough. And I think Dragonite being a really strong Pokemon, why not just pair it with Oricorio? They go together really well. So in general, it just makes a deck that can go 2 different directions, and both of those directions are completely opposite of each other, but they're both extremely effective. Dragonite, unfortunately, you can't attack again after you've used Giga Impact, but to be fair, with Dragonite, we're using it to end the game, right? We're utilizing Dragonite to basically take a KO, and then we can just sort of effectively retreat into Oricorio, be immune to whatever's probably in our opponent's active spot, or even if Oricorio gets KO'd, that's fine. That's only 1 prize card. We go back into Dragonite, and then we just kind of body our opponent. That's what this deck is all about. So the drawback to Dragonite's attack does feel quite bad. We don't have any way to double pivot out. Thankfully, this isn't like an Ultra Beast with Celesteela, because this would be absolutely insane, but I think it's actually balanced. And like I said, 180 means we're 1-hit KOing basically anything, so it doesn't really matter that much. We're not 2-hit KOing Pokemon, so we don't really care that we don't attack next turn. Most of the time, Dragonite is ending the game and living an attack anyway, so it really isn't that big of a deal. We want to bring in Dragonite and then attack take an attack, retreat, whatever it might be, force your opponent to get walled by Oricorio, or even just go through a Zeraora, and then we go back into Dragonite. A very, very good strategy. Honestly, Electrical Cord works for non-Electric type Pokemon. I don't know if people necessarily realize that. Incredibly strong. It really is just a really, really strong card. This with Zeraora and Dawn allows you to set up Dragonites really easily. In fact, if we get double Dratini on our board, we can actually set up 2 Dragonites pretty easily, especially if we're going against an opponent that isn't very fast-paced. I love this list. I really do. Dragonite, massively underrated. I wanted to give it a shout out. There's one other deck that I didn't put in this particular video, mainly because I just couldn't test it enough. I couldn't get a good enough read on it, and that was going to be Snorlax. I'm really high on Snorlax as well, but I actually think Dragonite, because it pairs well with Oricorio and the aggressive Electro-type cards like Zeraora, I actually think it is a really strong option. So keep that in mind. Tomorrow's video will mention Snorlax. It's not in this video, unfortunately, spoiler alert, but yeah. Here's Dragonite. Do not sleep on Dragonite. I think it's actually quite good. In fact, I saw one player who was, I believe, in like the top 3 of ranked this season so far was playing Dragonite. So if that gives you any kind of a reference, there it is. It's also done fairly well in some tournaments already. So yeah, Dragonite. It is crazy. I'm not gonna lie. It's a good card. Okay, next up, we've got Buzzwole. This is the same Buzzwole list that was dominating at the end of the last ranked season. I still think Buzzwole is one of the better decks in the game. With Flareon running around, Fire-type decks like Incineroar being so common, Solgaleo also being common, I actually don't think Buzzwole is nearly as well positioned as it was towards the end of the previous format, but it's still one of the best decks in the game. We all know what Buzzwole does. I'm not going to, describe this deck to you because we all understand how broken Buzzwole is. The free retreat, the double pivot, the leaf cape, the Ericas, the Lucamines. Like, this deck literally can do anything. There's nothing Buzzwole can't do. It's incredibly strong. The only downside to this deck, of course, is that you're not doing too much damage in one turn. But honestly, it's not really that big of a deal because we can conserve and refresh our energy so easily with Lucamine, and even if we're 2-hit KOing, we can 2-hit KO pretty consistently, and we can live so many attacks with 170 HP with Leaf Cape, with the healing from Ericas, with the Hand Disruption with Mars, Rocky Helmet for aggressive aggro decks, and of course Lucamine and Guzma, Sabrina, Cyrus. This deck has it all. It really does. Buzzwole's still broken. Even though, again, I don't think it's necessarily as well positioned as it was at the end of last format, I still think it's got to be a good choice. I couldn't even, into this new metagame, I couldn't make a video about the best decks for rank mode without talking about Buzzwole. It is still one of the top decks of the game. Now, depending on which decks see a lot of play in the next week or two, maybe Buzzwole kind of falls out of favor and it's not like a top choice, but early on, I mean, it's Buzzwole, guys. It's absolutely insane. This deck's crazy. I thought about adding Guzzlord to this list as well, because I think Guzzlord is actually maybe well positioned than Buzzwole, but I just don't know. I haven't seen enough people playing Guzzlord for me to be as confident in it, but just know that Guzzlord is still also a top deck of the format. Not included in this video. I chose to include Buzzwole, but that might change. You could honestly swap those two depending on how well they're positioned against the other decks that are seeing play in the format. But yeah, anyway, here's Buzzwole, still broken, still a really, really strong card. Okay, and then next up, we do have Giratina Darkrai, and again, similar to Buzzwole, one of the best decks in the game. We are still playing the Nihilego Poison version because, again, Oricorio is probably still going to pop up a little bit. Giratina Darkrai is Giratina Darkrai, and again, I don't really have much else to say about it. There's not too much in the format, I guess, that counters Giratina Darkrai that heavily. This is a deck that is just going to be able to beat anything in the game. It's consistent. If you take a look at a lot of the decks that are seeing a ton of play, things like Solgaleo, things like Charizard, things like Buzzwole, a lot of those decks seemingly have pretty good win rates against Giratina Darkrai, but a lot of the Sylveon decks, a lot of the Flareon decks, they kind of can struggle against Giratina Darkrai and how consistent it is. Now, again, Snorlax is a direct counter to this deck, and so is Oricorio. I don't know how many people are playing either of those two cards right now, so again, I think, honestly, if we take a look at the early tournament data, I think Giratina Darkrai is probably the most successful deck in these tournaments so far, which, again, I'm not surprised by, considering that everyone's playing the new cards, all of the decks aren't figured out. A few people are still playing Giratina Darkrai, which is very much figured out, and Oricorio not seeing that much representation really kind of opens up the way for Giratina and Darkrai. It's this strange anomaly. It really is this weird paradox that whenever a new set comes out, whenever we get new cards, really early on, the best option for decks to play oftentimes is just Giratina Darkrai because it's tried, it's true, it's tested, and it's one of the most consistent decks in the entire game. Eventually, we're going to see some early dominance from Giratina Darkrai, and then people will adjust. They'll play some counter meta decks, and then probably give all of the other decks a chance to breathe in the metagame. That's really just how it works for Pokemon Pocket whenever these new expansions come out. So yeah, Giratina Darkrai. I don't have much else to say about it. This is ranked battles, by the way. Like, we're trying to rank up. We're trying to win games. So, I mean, I have to recommend Giratina Darkrai to you guys, as well as a deck that's not playing any of the new cards, which is interesting, right? it's always nice. Listen, there's plenty of people that maybe didn't get lucky opening their Eevee Grove packs or just haven't spent a lot of money on the game, whatever the case may be. I wanted to let them know that there's still a lot of decks where you probably have all the cards you need that are really strong and can allow you to win games and to climb really effectively in ranked battles right now. Giratina Darkrai going to be one of those top choices for sure. Still, it probably will be forever. I mean, I don't know. Again, there is counterplay to Giratina Darkrai. It's just about whether that counterplay is seeing a lot of play. And right now it's not. So there we go. Giratina Darkrai. Okay, the last deck that we're going to take a look at today is going to be Sylveon. So this is kind of the new hot deck right now. This deck is flying around everywhere. I've seen so many of the top players playing this list. It's performing well in tournaments. A ton of people in the ranked ladder are playing this deck. This really feels to me very similarly to what the sort of Giratina Greninja decks were at the early end of last format, where or the beginning of the previous format, where they really were just dominating. I think that Sylveon is an incredible card. I just don't know if a lot of people know exactly the best places to play Sylveon yet. Also, it's tough to make the choice to change from Shiinotic to Sylveon, but one thing is for sure is that Sylveon in a deck like this can kind of do everything at the same time. So this deck list here is playing, by the way, this is Giratina Darkrai. This is playing only Dark Energies. I don't know if I mentioned that. Only Dark Energies. Buzzwole plays Grass. Those things are obvious to me, but I wanted to mention them for sure. Okay, Sylveon, Giratina, and Greninja. So this is similar to the Giratina Greninja decks that we saw play previous formats with like Tapu Lele or with Oricorio, things like that. What Sylveon does effectively is it makes your 20 card deck play like it only has 16 cards in the deck. That's what this card does. The math may not seem like it makes that much sense, right? Because you're playing 2 cards in your deck to effectively draw 2 cards. But that's broken. I don't know how else I can describe it. Effectively, you're playing 16 cards in your deck. The less cards that you're effectively playing in your deck, the more fast your deck is, the more consistent it is. Sylveon really just acts as a card that moves through your deck to find all of the other cards that you want. Predominantly your Froakies and your Greninjas and your rare candies. When we're playing the Greninja Giratina combination with Sylveon, we are much more likely to find our Greninjas and get them out early. We're only playing 1 copy of Cyrus and 1 Irida. That seems to be the more consistent thing here. Because we're playing water energies, we can heal Sylveon and Giratina because we can always just attach a water energy to them. I know some people might feel like playing water energies in the deck might make it a little bit less consistent, and I guess theoretically that's true, but we need some counterplay to Oricorio. Greninja, of course, is going to be able to not only ping Oricorio or ping anything on your opponent's bench, but it can't just one-hit KO Oricorio, right? So that's the upside. I think that you have to play water and psychic energies in the deck list, but honestly, Sylveon and Giratina and Greninja all have 1 colorless energy in their attack cost, which is all we need to justify playing dual energies in a deck like this. We can attack with Greninja, we can attack with Sylveon, we can attack with Giratina. We can move through our deck extremely quickly. We have the Greninja Water Shuriken Cyrus combination to KO basically anything we want. Most of the time, that's enough to win games. And again, you might be thinking, well, should I just play 2 Cyrus? It's an important win condition. To be fair, we're flying through our deck so quickly with 2 Sylveon EX and 2 Professor's Research that more often than not, we're drawing this 1 copy of Cyrus when we need to. But to be fair, maybe you could cut something else in the deck. You could cut 1 Mars. You could cut 1 Pokemon Communications. You could cut the Irida for a second Cyrus. But in general, I think playing 1 copy of all these cards is correct because we're moving through our deck so quickly. It's actually a bit more consistent than you might think. Mars, again, still worth running, still a really, really strong card. Cyrus is kind of our main win condition here. Irida is actually really clutch. There's so many games in my testing where I actually won because I was able to attach a Giant Cape and then play Irida and get out of range of getting KO'd. Really, really strong. Even the 70 damage from Sylveon cannot be underrated. Really, really strong. Plus the Water Shuriken Ping, that's 90 damage, right? So that's enough to 2-KO most Pokemon in the game. Giant Cape attached to Sylveon, you're going to live an attack from most things, considering like Charizard, Flareon, other Giratinas, Solgaleo. Like Giant Cape is really nice because it makes Sylveon much less easy to KO. And then, of course, 1 Pokecomb, because we are playing a lot of different Pokemon, a lot of different evolution Pokemon in the deck. It's actually, again, incredibly consistent. It's just that other chance, that other opportunity for us to kind of bring back like our second Froakie or like our second Eevee and try to find that Sylveon. Playing a Pokemon Communications to find that Sylveon, to then play it and then draw 2 cards is absolutely insane. This deck is super fast-paced, super consistent, and very, very powerful. I do think the best way to play Sylveon is as a support Pokemon. The upside to playing this particular deck is that you can utilize it both as a support option and an attacking option if you need to. And of course, we all know that Greninja, Giratina, and Cyrus is a deadly combination. So this really ends up being one of the most insane decks that I've seen early on. There's probably going to be some counterplay to it. I'm not saying this is the perfect deck list. It's going to have its ups and its downs, but considering how many of the top players have been playing this deck and how well it's been performing, I really can't see this deck not becoming a really, really top deck, at least early on in the game. So I wanted to mention it in this particular video. Hopefully you guys agree with me. Hopefully you guys can test this deck out and try it. The other upside is that, of course, you do need Sylveon to play this, but it's not like you need like a ton of the new cards. You know, I think a lot of people felt that a bit of a downside last format with like the ED Crisis cards, because those decks required like all of your entire deck to have all of the new cards, and some people aren't that lucky. So unfortunately, if you haven't pulled Sylveon EX before or yet, then, you know, that's a bit unfortunate for sure, because it is a bit important to a deck list like this. This Eevee can be swapped out for other things. We're playing the Collect Eevee mainly because when we're playing Sylveon, it's really nice to more consistently be able to find that Sylveon. So we would rather just draw and not, you know, attack or do any damage with Eevee, because a lot of times we're not even actually attaching to Eevee or using the attack. We're just going to be Broken Space Bellowing in the early game. But if we don't have Giratina and we don't have Sylveon in our hand, we're going to want to draw an extra card with Collect. It just ends up being kind of the better option. So anyway, there it is. Sylveon, Greninja, Giratina, one of my favorite decks early on in the format. I think that all of the decks that we mentioned in today's video are really strong, but keep in mind, there's a lot of other decks that you could play that might end up being some of the better decks to play in the format. We just don't know. It's really early. So these are my opinions. And of course, anything that isn't mentioned in this video will probably be mentioned in tomorrow's video. So you guys are going to want to stay tuned for that because, you know, a lot to talk about. A lot has changed in the format. I'm really excited. I think win streaks are good in Ultra Ball. I don't like them in Master Ball tier, but it is what it is. Hopefully you guys have a good grind. And yeah, you know, stay tuned because we're going to keep you guys up to date on how the metagame unfolds and how things develop over the next few days and, of course, the next few weeks. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Good luck, guys, in your ranked battle climb. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. And yeah, that's it. All right. Peace out. Have a good one. Bye.